Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Insomniac Files, where reality and the dream world collide in a haze of mystery and suspense. Each night, we embark on a journey through the darkest corners of the subconscious, and tonight's tale is no exception. Prepare yourself for an adventure that will blur the line between sleep and waking, where nightmares manifest and secrets from the deepest recesses of your mind emerge. As we walk this path, know this: in the world of dreams, nothing is ever truly as it seems. It was a foggy autumn morning when Detective Hauser was called in to investigate the disappearance of a patient from St. John's Hospital. The case seemed straightforward at first. Martha Bennett, a 45-year-old woman undergoing treatment for a severe infection, had vanished from her room in the middle of the night. The night nurses reported no sign of forced entry, and the door was locked from the inside. No one could explain how she had gotten out. The hospital staff was baffled, and with no signs of foul play, the police had been unable to make any progress. That's when Hauser decided to call in his trusted partner, Dr. Herlock Gnomes, a renowned medical expert with a mind that worked in unusual, often baffling ways. Gnomes arrived at the hospital an hour after Hauser, his disheveled appearance a sharp contrast to the sterile, polished environment of the hospital. He walked briskly toward Hauser, his coat fluttering behind him, carrying his signature leather-bound medical journal. "You called me in, Hauser," Gnome said, his voice filled with excitement. "What's the situation?" Hauser led him toward the patient's room, where the bed sheets were still untouched, the nightgown on the floor, and no trace of the missing woman. "This is where it happened," Hauser said. "She was here last night, and now, nothing. No sign of struggle, no blood, no evidence of anything unusual." Gnome stepped into the room, immediately scanning the surroundings with his sharp eyes. "No signs of trauma," he muttered to himself, taking note of the bed. "But the absence of blood is telling. If she was simply taken, there would be some form of resistance, a mess. Yet this room is too clean." Hauser watched as Gnomes paced around the room, his eyes darting from one detail to the next. "What do you think happened, Gnomes?" Gnomes paused, then looked back at Hauser. "I don't know yet. But the absence of physical evidence means that we're dealing with something more complex. Perhaps even something medical." Gnome's theory wasn't immediately clear to Hauser, but he trusted his colleague's instincts. The missing woman was medically stable, so why would she leave her bed in the middle of the night without a trace? Something didn't add up. The pair moved to the hospital's records room to speak with the doctors and review Martha Bennett's medical history. Hauser opened her file, scanning over the notes. She had been admitted with a severe infection caused by an untreated wound. The doctors had started her on a regimen of antibiotics, but something about her case had been puzzling. "There's something off about her treatment," Gnomes muttered, flipping through the papers. "What do you mean?" Hauser asked, looking over the medical charts with interest. "This," Gnomes pointed to a section of Bennett's chart. "This antibiotic. It's been shown to cause vivid hallucinations in rare cases. I've seen cases like this before, patients, driven mad by their own mind, acting out in strange ways, doing things they would never do in their right mind." Hauser raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying she might have hallucinated and wandered off? But then how did she leave the room? The door was locked from the inside." "Exactly," Gnome said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "That's what we need to find out. If she was under the influence of the drug, she could have been in a confused state, possibly wandering, but the locked door, that's the key. It means someone helped her. The question is, who?" Hauser looked at the nurse's station logs. It seems like no one noticed her missing until the morning shift came in. That's when we discovered she was gone. Gnomes nodded thoughtfully. She could have been moved without anyone noticing. But more importantly, someone must have known about her condition, someone with access to her room. Hauser's eyes widened as he pieced it together. You think someone in the hospital is involved? That's a possibility we need to consider, Hauser. But let's not jump to conclusions just yet. We need more evidence. Hauser and Gnomes spent the next few hours interviewing the staff, starting with the nurses who had worked the night shift. They questioned a young nurse named Linda, who had been responsible for monitoring Martha Bennett's room. Linda was visibly shaken by the events but seemed cooperative. I was on duty last night, Linda explained, her voice trembling. I checked on Mrs. Bennett just before my shift ended. She was asleep, no sign of distress. I didn't hear anything unusual, and the door was locked when I left. Did you see anyone else enter the room during the night? Hauser asked. Linda shook her head. No one. But I did notice something odd when I went to check the patient's bag earlier in the evening. What did you notice? Gnomes asked, his curiosity piqued. I noticed a faint odor coming from her bed, kind of like lavender, she replied, looking down at her hands nervously. It was strange because I didn't remember anyone using lavender oil in her room. Gnome's interest sharpened. Lavender oil? That's not something normally used in a hospital setting. Linda looked at them, unsure of what she had just revealed. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I remembered the smell distinctly. It lingered, but I didn't see anyone. Maybe it was just the scent from the soap in the bathroom, but it was so strong. Hauser's mind clicked. What if someone had used lavender oil to help mask the scent of something else? Something more sinister? That's what we need to find out, Gnome said, his voice filled with determination. Let's go check her for a line. If someone tampered with it, it could explain a lot. Gnomes and Hauser quickly made their way to the medical storage area, where the 4 bags were kept. The hospital's inventory system showed that a nurse had checked out a special form of lavender-scented saline solution earlier that night. This is it, Gnome said, his fingers tracing the label on the bag. This isn't just a saline solution. It's infused with a mild sedative. Whoever used this knew exactly how to make a patient more compliant without them realizing it. Hauser frowned, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. So, someone in the hospital drugged Bennett to keep her sedated. But why? Why did they need her to be unconscious or unaware? Gnome's eyes narrowed. It's not about sedation, Hauser. It's about manipulation. Whoever did this wanted her out of the way, and this sedative gave them the perfect opportunity. They drugged her, then took her out under the cover of night. Hauser's gaze shifted to the chart. We know the drug caused hallucinations. Could she have been moved in a confused state, not even realizing what was happening? It's possible, Gnomes replied. But someone would have had to guide her out of the room. Someone with access. As Hauser and Gnomes continued their investigation, it became clear that Linda, the nurse who had first interacted with Bennett, was becoming more suspicious. Her nervous behavior and the strange mention of lavender oil kept haunting Hauser's thoughts. They decided to follow up with Linda, hoping to uncover more about her involvement in the case. Hauser found her sitting alone in the break room, a cup of coffee in hand. She seemed calmer now, though there was a stillness about her that unsettled him. Linda, we need to know more about that lavender scent, Hauser said, sitting down across from her. You're telling us it wasn't normal for the hospital? Linda glanced around nervously before leaning in closer. It wasn't just lavender, she whispered, her voice trembling. I mixed it with something stronger. Something that wasn't supposed to be in the system. A sleep agent. Linda's confession hit Hauser like a sudden gust of wind. His thoughts swirled, trying to make sense of her words. A sleep agent? Why would she mix something like that into Bennett's for? Why would you do that? Hauser asked, his voice filled with disbelief and concern. Linda's face flushed with guilt as she nervously pushed her coffee cup aside. I didn't want to hurt her. I swear. But the pressure, you don't understand, detective. There are things happening in this hospital that you wouldn't believe. There are people above me, people who control everything. And they told me to administer that dose. They told me that Bennett needed to be handled. She was getting too close to something, and they wanted to keep her quiet. Hauser leaned forward, his instincts kicking in. Who told you to do this, Linda? She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if she expected someone to jump out of the shadows. I can't say. They have eyes everywhere. But I'm not the only one. I'm just a small part of something much bigger. Gnome stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. Whoever gave you these orders, what did they want with Bennett? Linda swallowed hard, looking down at her trembling hands. They were monitoring her research. She was close to a breakthrough, something that could change everything. But they didn't want that. Not at all. They couldn't afford to have her expose what they were doing. Hauser's mind raced. And this sleep agent, was it supposed to keep her sedated while they moved her? Or did they plan to do something else? Linda nodded, barely audible. They wanted to keep her asleep, disoriented, so they could erase everything she knew. It wasn't supposed to be permanent, just enough to disorient her and make her forget what she'd uncovered. Gnome's eyes narrowed. Disorient her? They were trying to cover up something bigger. We need to find out what Kavanaugh uncovered. Linda suddenly looked up, panic in her eyes. I shouldn't have told you this. I shouldn't have said anything. They'll come for me now. They'll know I've spoken to you. Hauser and Gnomes didn't waste any time. They had the vital clue they needed. Someone in the hospital had been involved in a much larger operation to keep Kavanaugh's research hidden. But who was behind it? Hauser knew the answer was out there, and they had to find it before Linda's warning came true. Back at the hospital's records room, Gnomes flipped through Kavanaugh's research notes with a sense of urgency. He scanned the papers, searching for anything that stood out. Hauser paced nearby, his thoughts racing, piecing together what they had learned from Linda and the strange behavior of the hospital staff. Here, Gnome said suddenly, pointing to a particular document. This is what we've been looking for. Hauser walked over quickly, his eyes scanning the document. It was a series of notes that Kavanaugh had written just before she had disappeared. Gnomes read aloud. Neurotox 7, potential for memory manipulation and consciousness reshaping. Phase 2, reprogramming subjects. Warning, unpredictable effects. Potential for creating false memories. Hauser's stomach tightened. This is it. This is what they were hiding. Gnomes nodded. Kavanaugh had discovered a way to manipulate memories, more than just erasing them. She was on the brink of understanding how to implant new ones. This wasn't just about medical advancement, it was about control. But why didn't she expose this? Hauser asked, his voice filled with frustration. Why did she try to hide it? Gnomes paused, his eyes darkening. Because she knew what it meant, Hauser. She understood the implications. If this technology fell into the wrong hands, it could change the very fabric of human existence. Imagine a world where memories could be altered or fabricated, where a person's entire history could be rewritten. Hauser's mind spun as he absorbed the enormity of what Kavanaugh had uncovered. We need to find out who's behind this. Whoever it is, they won't stop until they've erased all traces of her research. As Hauser and Gnomes discussed their next steps, it became increasingly clear that they needed to find out who had the most to lose from Kavanaugh's discoveries. They began to dig deeper into the corporate side of the case, following leads that took them to a pharmaceutical giant called Biogentech. Biogentech was one of the leading companies in neurological research, and it didn't take long for Hauser and Gnomes to connect them to Kavanaugh's work. They were the primary investors in the Neurotox 7 project, and they stood to make billions from the successful development of memory-altering drugs. Hauser and Gnomes set up a meeting with a former executive of Biogentech who had worked closely with Kavanaugh, Dr. William Price. Price had left the company shortly after Kavanaugh's disappearance, and there were rumors that he had grown disillusioned with the direction the company was headed. When they met Dr. Price, he looked worn out, his once sharp features now lined with stress. He invited them into his modest office, where he sat behind a desk stacked with papers, his hands trembling slightly. "You're the detectives, right?" Price asked, his voice hoarse. "I've been expecting you." "Dr. Price," Hauser said, his voice steady. "We need to know everything you know about Kavanaugh's research. What was Biogentech really planning with Neurotox 7? Price exhaled deeply, staring down at the desk. "Kavanaugh's research, she was on to something big. Something dangerous. When she started talking about manipulating memories, I knew it was going too far. The company was all in. They saw the potential to control not just the market but entire populations. But Kavanaugh, she wouldn't go along with it." Gnomes leaned forward. "So she tried to stop it?" Price nodded. "She tried to expose what Biogentech was planning. But they had their own agenda: power, control. They didn't care about the ethical implications. They wanted to rewrite human consciousness, to create a generation of people who would be completely dependent on their drug. She had to disappear." Hauser's mind raced as he pieced it together. "And you left because you couldn't stand it?" Price grimaced. "I couldn't. They were pushing forward with Kavanaugh's research, but the more I saw, the more I knew it had to stop. I had to leave, but I was never truly free. They have their claws in everything. They were always watching me." Dr. Price's information opened up new avenues for the investigation. They now knew that Biogentech was more deeply involved than they had originally suspected. But the more they uncovered, the more they realized that this wasn't just about a missing woman. It was about a conspiracy at the highest levels of power, one that threatened to change the very nature of human freedom. The search for answers took them deeper into the pharmaceutical industry's inner workings, uncovering a web of corruption and secrecy. They learned about the covert trials, the illegal experiments, and the people who had disappeared into the shadows. But it wasn't just about the technology anymore. It was about the lives that had been affected. People had been manipulated, controlled, and used as pawns in a deadly game of corporate greed. Hauser and Gnomes were no longer just fighting to expose the truth. They were fighting to prevent the world from slipping into a new era of psychological tyranny. Hauser and Gnomes were deep in thought as they reviewed Dr. Price's confession. The walls of Biogentech and its massive influence were closing in on them, but it was clear the path to the truth was far from straightforward. The more they uncovered, the more Hauser realized just how deep the conspiracy ran. Price's revelation about Biogentech's unethical experiments sent a chill down his spine. The pharmaceutical giant had its hands in everything from governmental contracts to shady black market dealings. Kavanaugh had been right all along. This wasn't just about curing illness. This was about controlling human behavior. "We need to speak to more insiders," Hauser said as they left Price's office. "Someone at Biogentech must have information on where this is going." Gnomes nodded, his mind already processing the next steps. "But it's not just about Biogentech. It's about the people behind it, the ones who control everything. We need to expose them." As they made their way to the parking garage, Hauser's phone buzzed. It was a message from Linda, the nurse who had been involved in the initial drugging of Bennett. Her message was short but urgent. "I know who's behind it. Meet me at the docks. 2 a.m. You're running out of time." Hauser and Gnomes arrived at the docks just after 2 a.m. The area was dark, only a few dim street lamps casting shadows along the narrow path. Hauser's eyes scanned the area, looking for any signs of movement. He wasn't sure what to expect from Linda, but he knew that if she had information, it could be the final piece of the puzzle. They stood by the edge of the water, the sound of waves gently lapping against the docks filling the silence. After a few minutes, Linda appeared, her face shadowed under the brim of her hat. She looked around nervously before approaching them. "I've told you everything I know," she said, her voice shaky. "But there's one more thing, something that might help you understand who's really in charge." Hauser stepped forward. "Who is it, Linda? Who's pulling the strings?" Linda glanced over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the surroundings before she leaned in closer. "It's not just Montgomery. He's a puppet. The real mastermind is a man named Victor Darden. He runs Biogentech's parent company, but he's also tied to a much darker network. He has connections to politicians, criminal syndicates, and even the military. The control he has over people, over lives, it's unimaginable." Gnomes frowned. "Why haven't we heard of him before? Why is he hiding in the shadows?" Linda lowered her voice even further. "Because he's untouchable. Darden's been in the game for decades. He controls things from the background. And now, he wants to use Kavanaugh's research to solidify his power. Neurotox 7 is just the beginning." Hauser felt a chill run down his spine. "Where can we find him?" Linda shook her head. "You can't just find him. But I know someone who can help. A former Biogentech employee named Evelyn Locke. She's been working as a whistleblower, but she's disappeared. No one knows where she's gone." Gnome's eyes widened. "Evelyn Locke. I've heard of her. She's the one who was behind the initial reports about Kavanaugh's work. But if she's gone underground, she's either in hiding or in danger." Linda nodded. "Exactly. If you want to take down Darden, she's your only lead." After the meeting with Linda, Hauser and Gnomes began to piece together a new plan. Evelyn Locke was the missing link they needed to bring Darden down. They had no idea where to start looking for her, but they knew they couldn't waste any time. "I'll reach out to some old contacts," Gnomes said, his voice thoughtful. "If anyone knows where Evelyn is, it'll be someone from her past. I've worked with her before. She's a brilliant mind, but she's also very careful. If she's hiding, she's likely left behind some clues." Hauser nodded. "I'll go through Biogentech's records again. There's got to be something more we can use to find Darden's connection to this whole mess." Gnomes spent hours contacting his former colleagues in medical research, following leads that seemed to go nowhere. Meanwhile, Hauser went through every document connected to Biogentech, looking for a name, anything that could connect Evelyn Locke to the elusive Victor Darden. At 3 a.m., Hauser got a breakthrough. A name appeared repeatedly on internal emails between Biogentech employees: Evelyn Locke. She had been a high-ranking employee involved in various secretive projects related to Neurotox 7. But one document stood out. A report from an old employee referenced a meeting with Darden regarding a new project in a secure location. Hauser quickly flagged the document and sent it to Gnomes. "That's it," Gnomes said, eyes lighting up when he saw the file. "This project, whatever it is, could lead us to Locke. If she was involved with Darden, she'd be at the center of this." The trail had finally led them to something bigger, Victor Darden's hidden project. The question now was where they would find it. Hauser and Gnomes made their way to a location listed on the documents, a remote facility in the outskirts of the city, far from the public eye. The facility was listed as a biogentech research center, but there were no signs of its existence. It was as though it had been erased from every public record. As they arrived, the facility loomed in front of them, a cold, gray structure that seemed to absorb the light around it. The area was heavily guarded, with security cameras, fences, and armed guards positioned at every corner. The place felt like a fortress. "We're not getting in easily," Hauser said, eyeing the security perimeter. "But we don't have much time. We'll find a way," Gnomes replied, his eyes narrowing. "We just need to be smart." After surveying the perimeter, Gnomes and Hauser came up with a plan. Gnomes used his medical credentials to infiltrate the building under the guise of conducting a routine inspection. Meanwhile, Hauser followed, sneaking past the guards using a side entrance that they had found on their reconnaissance. Once inside, the sterile environment of the research facility greeted them, a chilling reminder of what they were up against. The halls were lined with state-of-the-art medical equipment, but there was a sense of unease that seemed to permeate the air. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows as they navigated through the facility, eventually finding a stairwell that led to the lower levels. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the place became. The walls were lined with lab coats, medical charts, and sealed doors that held secrets too dangerous to be revealed. Hauser felt a cold knot in his stomach. "What are they doing here, Gnomes? What have we walked into?" Gnomes didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the room ahead of them, landing on a locked door at the far end. "Whatever it is, it's going to be worse than anything we've encountered so far." Hauser felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Let's find out." Hauser and Gnomes approached the locked door at the end of the hall, their footsteps barely audible against the sterile tiles. The tension in the air was thick, and Hauser couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something that would change everything. "Here we are," Gnomes said quietly, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. "This is where the real work is being done." Hauser's fingers tightened around his gun as he followed Gnomes to the door. Gnomes produced a set of lockpicks from his coat pocket and got to work. He moved with the precision of a skilled surgeon, his hands steady as he manipulated the lock. "There's no turning back after this," Hauser whispered, his voice low but filled with a sense of foreboding. "No turning back," Gnomes repeated, his tone grim. "We're too deep into this now." With a soft click, the door swung open, revealing a dark hallway beyond. The air was heavy, thick with a musty scent that made Hauser's stomach churn. The walls were lined with medical equipment, tubes, wires, and strange devices that Hauser couldn't even begin to understand. "This is it," Gnomes muttered, his voice barely audible as he stepped into the room. "The heart of the operation." Hauser followed him, his mind racing with questions. What the hell are they doing here? Ahead of them, the hallway led to a large, open space. The walls were lined with monitors, each one displaying various readings, charts, and data Hauser couldn't comprehend. At the center of the room, A large glass tank stood in the middle of the floor. Inside the tank, floating in a pale, viscous liquid, was a figure, human in shape, but disfigured. Hauser's eyes widened in horror. "What is that?" Gnomes took a step closer, his gaze fixed on the figure inside the tank. "That, Hauser, is what they've been working on. Neurotox 7 isn't just a drug, it's a tool for mind control. They've been experimenting on people, trying to create something else." The figure in the tank shifted slightly, and Hauser could just make out the faint outline of a human face. It was pale and distorted, its features almost unrecognizable. The sight sent a chill down Hauser's spine. "They're turning people into mindless puppets," Gnome said softly. This is what they've been doing. They've been using Neurotox 7 to reshape human consciousness." Hauser felt his blood run cold. "We need to get out of here. Now." Gnomes was already moving, his eyes darting from one monitor to the next as he frantically examined the data. "This is worse than I thought. They've been experimenting with altering memories, erasing identities. These people, they don't even know who they are anymore." Hauser grabbed Gnomes by the arm. "We need to find Evelyn Locke. Now." Hauser and Gnomes quickly made their way to a nearby computer terminal, hoping to find more information about the experiments and Evelyn Locke's whereabouts. Gnomes began typing rapidly, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he accessed files that had been carefully hidden behind layers of security. "There's so much here," Gnomes muttered, his eyes scanning the screen. "Patient records, test results, and..." He paused, his eyes narrowing as he found a specific file. "Here. Evelyn Locke. She was here recently. She must have known about all of this." Hauser leaned over, his eyes locking onto the file. It detailed Locke's involvement with the experiments, including her objections to the project's direction. The more Hauser read, the more he realized that Evelyn Locke had been trying to expose what Biogentech was doing. She had tried to warn the world, but the company had silenced her before she could go public. "She knew," Hauser said, his voice tense. "She knew what was happening, and she tried to stop it." Gnomes didn't look up from the screen. "And they must have gotten to her. If she's not here, then she's either in hiding or worse. We need to find her," Hauser said, his voice firm. "Before they can finish what they started." Gnome sighed, leaning back in his chair. "The information on this computer isn't enough. We need to find her location, her last known whereabouts. But Biogentech's network is too big. They've likely covered their tracks." Hauser thought for a moment before an idea struck him. "What if we go to her house? If she's been hiding, she might have left a trail there. A place to start." Gnomes nodded. "It's a long shot, but it's the only shot we've got." Hauser and Gnomes arrived at Evelyn Locke's apartment just before dawn. The building was old, with peeling paint and a distinct smell of mildew in the air. As they ascended the narrow staircase, Hauser's thoughts raced. What would they find in her apartment? Would they be too late? Gnomes, his mind still focused on the experiments they had just uncovered, led the way to Locke's apartment door. Hauser knocked lightly, but when no one answered, he tried the door handle. It was unlocked. "Stay sharp," Hauser whispered, pushing the door open slowly. The apartment was small but neat, a sparse living space with only a few pieces of furniture. A desk sat near the window, covered in papers. Hauser moved toward the desk, sifting through the clutter. Gnome stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of Locke's presence. "There's something here," Hauser said, picking up a folder filled with documents. "These are her notes. Everything she's learned about Neurotox 7, the experiments, the people behind it all. She was getting ready to go public with this. Gnomes moved closer, flipping through the papers. These are detailed. She knew more than we could have ever imagined. She was putting together a case against Biogentech. Hauser paused, glancing at Gnomes. But why would she leave all this behind? If she was hiding, why leave clues? Gnome's eyes widened with realization. Because she didn't leave it behind. She was taken. As Hauser and Gnomes continued their search of the apartment, they found one final clue, an old, worn envelope hidden in the back of a drawer. It was addressed to Evelyn Locke, but the sender's name was smudged. Inside was a letter, written in haste, warning her of the dangers of the research she was involved in. The letter read, "They know what you're doing. They're coming for you. Don't trust anyone. Get out while you can." Hauser clenched his fists. This is it. Someone on the inside tried to warn her. Gnomes nodded gravely. Whoever wrote this was trying to protect her. But it's clear now, she's in hiding, and Biogentech will stop at nothing to find her. Hauser and Gnomes sat at a small cafe across the street from Evelyn Locke's apartment, silently reviewing the evidence they had uncovered. The letter they found had been the tipping point, but they still didn't know who had sent it, or where Locke was hiding. "I don't like this," Hauser said, looking at the pile of papers in front of him. "Everything points to Biogentech and Victor Darden, but we still don't know who's really behind all of this. Darden's just a figurehead. There's someone else pulling the strings." Gnomes took a long sip of his coffee, staring at the documents. "You're right. Darden may be the public face of Biogentech, but he's too visible. Whoever is orchestrating this is doing so from the shadows." Hauser's eyes narrowed. "So, who's behind him? Who could be that powerful?" Gnomes leaned back in his chair, his gaze focused somewhere distant. "It's not just about power, Hauser. It's about control. Whoever is pulling the strings has influence over everything: politics, the media, the health industry. They're using Biogentech as a tool to manipulate the global narrative. And Locke found out too much." Hauser clenched his fist. "Then we have to find her. If she has the key to unlocking all of this, we can take down Biogentech and whoever's behind it." The next day, Hauser and Gnomes focused on tracking down more leads on Evelyn Locke. They spoke to more former employees of Biogentech, trying to find any connection between her and a shadowy figure they hadn't been able to identify yet. One name kept coming up in their search: Miles Granger. Granger had been a senior security officer at Biogentech until he was mysteriously fired a few months before Locke's disappearance. People spoke of him as a loyal enforcer, a man who had connections to powerful people but was now out of the picture. "Granger's our guy," Hauser said, his voice grim. "If he was connected to both Darden and Locke, he might know where she went or who's behind all this." Gnomes looked at the notes Hauser had gathered. "We need to find Granger. If he's still alive, he's our best chance to get to the bottom of this." Granger's trail led Hauser and Gnomes to a rundown apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. The building looked abandoned, its windows shattered and doors left ajar. As they walked up the stairwell, the sense of foreboding only deepened. Hauser was the first to knock on Granger's door. He waited a moment before pushing it open, gun drawn. The apartment was empty, but something felt off. There were no signs of life, yet everything inside was too well kept, as if someone had been living there but left in a hurry. Gnome stepped forward, scanning the room. He found a torn-up map on the coffee table, its corners curled and weathered. "This map," he said, pointing to a specific location. This is the same location mentioned in the files we found on Biogenteca's secret project. It's a remote compound, a research facility deep in the woods. Hauser's eyes widened. A compound? Granger was involved with this all along. Gnomes nodded. It's where the real experiments are happening. This is where Locke would be. The journey to the remote compound was long and treacherous. The facility was situated deep in a forest, miles away from the nearest town. Hauser and Gnomes had to trek through the dense underbrush, navigating around fallen trees and wild terrain. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and the silence of the wilderness was unsettling. "We're getting close," Gnomes said, his voice cutting through the quiet. "According to the map, the compound should be just ahead." Hauser nodded, his thoughts still focused on the task at hand. "Let's keep moving. If Granger's here, we might be able to get answers. But we have to be careful. We don't know what's waiting for us inside." They reached the compound just as the sun began to set. The facility was a large, fortified building surrounded by a high fence, its windows dark and uninviting. Hauser's heart pounded as they moved closer. "This is it," Hauser said, his voice steady despite the growing unease. "Let's find Locke." Gnomes pulled out a set of lockpicks. "We'll need to break in. But once we're inside, we'll have to move quickly." The moment they stepped inside the compound, they realized how deeply the operation ran. The walls were lined with state-of-the-art medical equipment, and there were countless monitors displaying data, patient records, and confidential research. "This place is bigger than I thought," Hauser said, scanning the room. "It's not just a research facility, it's a full operation. Whatever they're doing here is beyond what we've uncovered so far." Gnomes moved to one of the monitors, his fingers dancing across the screen. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a section of the data. "This is a neural interface, something that could manipulate memories in real time. They're not just altering memories, they're controlling them." Hauser's blood ran cold. "That's insane. They're creating an army of mind-controlled people." Gnome's face darkened. "And if Darden has control of this technology, it could change everything. But we need to find Evelyn. She's the key to stopping this." They moved deeper into the compound, searching every room and every file. They were getting closer to the truth, but the more they uncovered, the more dangerous their mission became. In the deepest part of the compound, they finally found her. Evelyn Locke was sitting in a small, sterile room, her hands bound to the chair in front of her. Her face was pale, her eyes tired, but when she saw Hauser and Gnomes, a flicker of hope crossed her features. "You found me," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I didn't think anyone would. We're here to get you out of here, Evelyn," Hauser said, moving quickly to untie her. "No," she shook her head weakly. "It's too late. Darden has already won. The experiment is too far gone. They're already using it on people. They've created a network of sleepers, people whose memories have been completely rewritten. They're loyal to him. And they're everywhere." Gnomes moved toward her, his voice calm but firm. "We can stop this, Evelyn. You know how to break the system." She looked up at them, her eyes filled with despair. "I tried. But they've implanted false memories in people, erasing their true selves. It's a system that can't be shut down without destroying everything. You can't stop them." Hauser's resolve only hardened. "We'll figure it out. We have to." Hauser stood in the sterile, dimly lit room, looking down at Evelyn Locke. Her face, though pale and exhausted, still held that spark of defiance. The light from the monitors flickered over her, casting long shadows across the room. The weight of the situation pressed down on them, But there was no turning back now. The final confrontation was close. "We can't waste time, Evelyn," Hauser said, his voice steady but urgent. "We need to act fast." "How do we stop Darden? You said there's a way to break the system. What do we need to do?" Evelyn's eyes locked onto Hauser's, her lips trembling slightly. "It's not simple, Detective. The system Darden built, it's like a virus. Once it's in someone's mind, it spreads quickly, erasing memories and planting false ones. It's a form of psychological warfare." She paused, her breath shaky, but she continued. "The only way to shut it down is to sever the core connection. But it's in Darden's hands now. He controls the central system, the one that links every subject together. Without him, it can't function, but if we try to destroy it, the entire network could collapse. The sleepers will lose everything, memories, identities, everything." Gnomes, standing by the door, rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "So, we need to find a way to sever the connection without destroying the sleepers. Is there a way to neutralize the system without causing irreversible damage?" Evelyn's eyes darted to the monitors. "There's one way. Darden's central hub. It's located in the heart of the facility, the control room. It's protected by layers of security. If we can access it, we can disable the system from the inside. But getting there, that's going to be the hard part." Hauser nodded. "We don't have much time. We need to move fast." The tension in the air was palpable as Hauser, Gnomes, and Evelyn made their way through the compound. The facility, once calm, was now buzzing with energy. The central control room was located on the highest floor of the compound, a fortified structure filled with guards, cameras, and automated defenses. The stakes had never been higher. As they moved through the dim hallways, Hauser couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every corner they turned, every shadow that passed, made him more alert. Darden knew they were coming. "There's no time to waste," Gnomes whispered, his voice barely audible. "The longer we wait, the more risk we're taking. We need to get to the control room before they lock everything down." Hauser kept his eyes on the path ahead. "What's the plan?" "We break in," Gnomes said, glancing at Evelyn. "You said there's a way into the control room. How do we access it?" Evelyn led them down another narrow hallway, her pace quickening. "Through the service tunnels. They're hidden, but I know where they are. We'll need to bypass the security doors, but it's possible. We just have to be careful." Hauser's mind raced as he processed the information. "All right. We move quickly. No mistakes." The service tunnels were dark and narrow, a stark contrast to the sterile, high-tech environment of the rest of the facility. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete, and the only sound was the faint hum of machinery in the distance. Hauser felt the weight of the mission pressing on his shoulders as they made their way deeper into the bowels of the compound. As they turned a corner, Gnomes stopped abruptly, raising his hand. Hauser tensed, his eyes scanning the shadows. "What is it?" Gnomes motioned toward a small, unmarked door at the end of the tunnel. "The door to the control room is behind that. But getting past it won't be easy. We'll need to disable the security system before we can open it." Evelyn stepped forward, pulling a small device from her bag. "I've got a way in," she said, her fingers moving quickly to attach the device to the door's control panel. "This will temporarily disable the security system, but it won't last long." Hauser kept his eyes on the door, listening for any signs of movement. "How long do we have?" 5 minutes, Evelyn said, glancing back at him. "Maybe less." "Then let's move," Hauser urged, his voice sharp. "We don't have much time." The door clicked open with a soft hiss, revealing the central control room. It was exactly as Hauser had imagined, large, sleek, and filled with monitors, all displaying data that made no sense to him. At the center of the room stood a large terminal, its screens flashing with encrypted data. Evelyn stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she approached the terminal. "This is it. If we can override this system, we can take Darden down." Hauser looked around the room. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. "We don't have much time. We need to hurry." Evelyn began typing rapidly on the terminal, her fingers moving faster than Hauser thought possible. "This won't be easy. Darden has set up multiple layers of encryption. It's going to take a few minutes." The seconds ticked by, each one feeling heavier than the last. Hauser's eyes darted to the door, his hand instinctively resting on his gun. Gnomes, meanwhile, stood at the ready, scanning the room for any signs of danger. Then, just as the door to the control room creaked open, Evelyn's voice rang out. "Got it! I'm in!" The screens around them flickered, the encrypted data beginning to unravel as Evelyn worked her magic. "This is it," she said, her voice filled with a sense of triumph. "We've cut the connection. The sleepers won't be controlled anymore. Darden's system is offline." But just as she finished, the door slammed open with a deafening bang. Darden himself stepped into the room, his eyes dark with fury. "Not so fast," Darden said, his voice dripping with malice. "You think you've won? You're too late." Hauser's hand tightened around his gun. "This ends now, Darden." The two men stared each other down, the tension between them palpable. Darden's eyes narrowed as he moved closer, his expression cold and calculating. "You have no idea what you've just done," Darden sneered. "This isn't just about control, it's about evolution. You're stopping the next step in human progress. You think you can stop me? You think you can stop us? We've already stopped you," Hauser said, his voice steady. "You're finished." Darden stepped back, his hands raised in mock surrender. "You've won this battle, Hauser. But you've underestimated one thing. You can't stop what's already in motion." Hauser, Gnomes, and Evelyn stood in the control room, their mission complete. The fight against Darden and his conspiracy had taken them to the edge, but they had succeeded in disabling his operation. Darden's plans had been thwarted, but the consequences of his actions would linger. "Is it over?" Hauser asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. "For now," Gnomes said, his expression thoughtful. "But the world we're in has changed. The technology Darden was working on, it's out there. We've stopped him, but others will try to take his place." Evelyn nodded, her voice steady. "We have to stay vigilant. Darden may be gone, but the system he built, it's still alive." Hauser looked at both of them, his mind filled with questions about what the future held. "Then we'll keep fighting. We won't stop." As they walked out of the compound, the world outside felt different. The sun was rising, casting light on a new day, a day where the battle for human freedom had just begun.